Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to welcome Chetan Kapoor today on our podcast Transformed. Is a podcast that cuts across many themes in philanthropy, in social entrepreneurship, and in education. And I've had this fantastic opportunity to bring on our podcast today Chetan Kapoor. Chetan is the CEO of Tech Mahindra Foundation. Welcome, Chetan.
Thank you so much, Vinti. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Chetan, I see this opportunity very rarely where somebody on our guest has had wide ranging experience around being a social entrepreneur, being in philanthropy, and now is running a major foundation. So I hope that we are able to draw on this wide ranging experience today.
Well, I hope so too. And yes, I think heavens have been kind to me to have allowed me to traverse this trajectory. Because when I look back at almost the 25 years that I've completed in the social sector, it's just been an immense amount of learning, understanding, observing things on the ground. And I hope I'll be able to share some of those experiences when we talk today.
No, thank you, Chetan. Chetan, let's talk about one of the things that scares us all when we come into this sector, which is the scale of the problem. Any issue in this country, whether it's access to water, education, healthcare, mental well-being, just the scale of the problem is overwhelming. And in the sector, we have now been discussing system change. But often the nuances of system change are not very well understood by all the stakeholders. And I want you to give me a view based on your experience on what does system change really mean for you, both across the different roles you've played and today as the CEO of Tech Mahindra Foundation.
So, so before we start talking about scale, we'll discuss systems. And even before we talk about system change, let's just unpack the idea of system itself.
Sure.
Now, for those of us who've studied the basics of computer science, we know that any system essentially starts with an input, goes through a phase of processes, and then you get certain outputs and outcomes, right? The same is true for what we do in our sector. Any intervention that we do has to follow this input, process, output sort of a pattern. If we look at the context of India and we pick up any theme, you pick up education, you pick up employability, you pick up healthcare, you will see that there are, that while there is a system that has been defined by the powers that be, which has been running for many, many, many years. But then there are many subsystems and microsystems which actually lead up to that. And then when you think about system change, now we know that no system is perfect. We know that, science teaches us that there is always a room for improvement. And therefore, what we normally call system change, I would like to call it systems improvement. Because systems do exist, right? Some of them may be partially broken. Some of them may have certain areas that always require improvement. Many of our systems which have been there around may have become obsolete. They may not be very effective and efficient. So there's always a room for improvement. And this is where I think the civil society, who we are, has a very important role to play. And instead of being scared by the idea of scale, I think we should be excited by it. I think we've got this fantastic opportunity to be working in a country like India when you think of so much for variety to do. So the idea of scale, actually truly excites me because the playing field is so large. And when we are at the end of the day trying to level this playing field, we'll talk about equity in a while because that's essentially what we're trying to do. There are so many things that you can do as an organization to bring about micro improvements, right? And improvements that affect classrooms, improvements that impact how the healthcare system is delivered to our population. And these improvements Some of these incremental, sometimes you may even take a leap. But all of this is what essentially leads to systems change, right? And done the right way, done in the spirit of working with the government and not against the government. I think there are lots of possibilities that the sector has already unlocked and will continue to do so.
No, I think I prefer the word system improvement as well over system change. Somehow, I've always imagined systemic change coming only from political intent. So I have to acknowledge that here. And when civil society comes together and works with the state, there can be room for improvement and efficiency and collaboration. So I think I'm going to stick with the word improvement. As Tech Mahindra also, I think, Chetan, you've done a lot of work now. Please give me a concrete example across your projects around where this improvement for a delivery of whether it's services around disability or education or skilling, which are the areas you're working in. How has that worked? How have those levers led to improvement?
So I think it's still work in process as far as Tech Mahindra Foundation is concerned. See, our mainstay for the last decade has been around skill development of youth. And also by design, Tech Mahindra Foundation is an urban organization. So we have focused on urban poverty alleviation, within which we've taken education and employability as the two themes of work. Now, when we started our work in skill development back in 2012, even for the government, which was by then taking an active role in skill development of youth, there was a lot of, I would say, experimentation going on as to, how do we get it right? In some ways, at least in the initial phase of our skill development program, which is called the SMART program or Skills for Market Training program, we chose to take a path where we said, okay, let us establish a robust model, small model that works and which is replicable, right? So we went about setting up a chain of these centers and academies that we are currently running. And I think in the last 10, 12 years that we've been around, I think we've now reached a point where we have a great deal of confidence as to how do you get it right, right? Having worked with so many centers and some of which have been working all of these while, the finer nuances of any skill development program comprise mobilization of youth from communities, getting them to your center or wherever the training is actually going on, and then helping them into livelihoods, which could be placement into entry level jobs, which is what we've been doing all of this while. It's only in the recent times that we've started engaging with the government more actively, and we now have, I would say, a seat at the table where people who are in the government and government, we normally think about politics, but in our case, I prefer to talk about the bureaucracy because that's where a lot of these decisions are taken. And I've been fortunate to work with many good pro-reform officials, bureaucrats who have that decision-making authority to bring about changes. So I'm quite hopeful that with the engagement that we now have, we should be able to bring about some of our thought of skill development, into the scheme of things as far as the government is concerned. Let me also answer this question by looking at my previous experience, and a concrete example that comes to my mind, where an initiative of the civil society has led to a significant adoption by the government and is making a change. ASAR, or the Annual Status of Education report that Pratham has been bringing about since 2005, how that has managed to significantly change the narrative when it comes to focusing on learning outcomes in education. See, in 2005, and at that time I used to work for Pratham, there was a lot of talk about access to education, right? The Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan that had come, which now is, of course, the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, that had managed that every child in the country had a primary school within a kilometer of where he or she lives. So the access to education issue was getting solved very quickly, right? But what was pretty clear is that while the access is there are still huge deficits when it comes to quality. And I think by just doing this large scale rapid assessment around foundational literacy and numeracy, which is what ASAR did, I think we did see a clear shift in narratives when it comes to embedding the idea of what quality education really means in the scheme of things when it, in the government. So when we had the Right to Education Act come in 2010, and then the new education policy that came in 2020, you can see how both of these documents have picked up some of the themes which the Asar report talked about in the mid 2000s. So there have been some very good examples of how systems have incorporated and improved thanks to the efforts of the civil
And
society.
it seems that that journey has to be demystified, because so many more folks want to come in and do it. And at one hand, we have a large amount of philanthropic capital also coming in various segments, which seems a different model. It seems a model from funding to scale versus this, what you're explaining, this sort of granular
Yep.
piloting,
Yep.
then improving, then advocacy with government, and then coming to standards. So talk about your views on
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. So see, it's like you said, it's a journey, right? And it's not an easy journey. It's a journey filled with it's an arduous journey filled with a lot of challenges. Takes a lot of patience, and we know that while the starting point could be good intentions, but as the old adage says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So it can't just be intentions. In fact, this is important because when we now as a funder look for organizations who we want to fund, the first thing that we try and look for is the purity of intent. So we know that even that is something which is not easy to find. But once that is established, then you have to really start the journey, which I would say starts with scaling deep rather than scaling wide. See, as we discuss, the complexities of the challenges that we are trying to address are so significant and also so varied from point A to point B. You move 50 kilometers in the same state and you will find a different lens with which you have to look at something. So for any social entrepreneur who's sort of has the right intent and wants to start, you have to go through a phase of digging deep and trying to really understand what are the layers which you will have to unravel before you can actually come up with any kind of solution. So that journey, which has to go through a phase of deep understanding, talking to people, really understanding what are the root causes of some of the problems that exist, right? All of that takes a lot of understanding, going deep into the ground. And if you have to establish your credibility with the Niti Aayog, this part of the journey is extremely important, which sometimes social entrepreneurs in a hurry tend to think that we could just skim over this. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you may have your contacts which can get you the meetings at the right places,
Yes.
but unless you have that demonstrated experience of working close to the ground, coming up with a solution after a few trials, and then trialing it out for a while before you can really say that yes, this is a solution which I can scale, right? I think it's not going to work. So whether it was the Asar example, Asar came about in 2005, but Pratham had been around for at least 10 years before that, right? So it understood what it takes to work in communities to be able to bring about this change. I think it is these efforts which truly translate into adoption, acceptance, and adoption, and therefore change.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I think sometimes those social entrepreneurs who are coming into the system now get tired in this long, lonely journey before they have enough evidence, before they have enough programmatic knowledge, and of course community knowledge. So I'm sure those that are listening and are on the brink of social entrepreneurship will see this as coming into it knowing that this takes this long. At the same time, Chetan, tell me a little bit about, you've been long enough to know that there is sometimes a pilot that fails. And these are large scale pilots. there are large scale RCT trials, but they don't make it through to large scale adoption. Why do you think that happens? I know we've spoken this about this offline too, but what happens at that stage?
So, in fact, there are several examples of pilots that I can cite where the pilot has been successful, but the scale up has failed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it's, the reasons are not far to seek. It's when we design a pilot, we sometimes design the pilot to succeed, which is a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
You can't be taking all the favorable factors and then saying that, okay, we are going to pilot it here. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So the pilot itself has to be done in a way where you can encounter in a small, phase of time or in a small geography, almost all the challenges that you're going to face once you scale it up. Only then will you really understand that, what is it that will take me to go from X to 100X, right? Second, the mistake which many times I've seen people do is not pay adequate attention to design, to program design, planning and program design, which is so essential in the context of almost everything that we do. And one of the biggest mistakes that happens there is not enough stakeholder consultation. See, who are we solving it for, right? What is their voice in that solution? Right. In fact, my belief since the time that I started working in the sector, and my learning from Pratham, where I spent about three and a half years, and if I can say this in Hindi, because I used to talk about this, I used to say कि किसी भी समस्या का समाधान उस समुदाय के पास होता है जहाँ पे आप उसके लिए समाधान खोजने गए हैं, ठीक है, और कारण है जिसकी वजह से वो उनको कर नहीं पाते हैं, right? They are not able to implement those solutions. So what you really have to help them is to find ways to implement those solutions, which sometimes already exist with them, right? But we think that because this is the problem and we think this is the solution, so we try and make a match there, right? But it's very important to first understand, in many cases the solutions are right there. But unless you involve them in the design, for the solution, you're not going to get it, right? I'll give you an example. Once a very successful pilot that I've been a part of at the design stage, prevention of school dropouts. Now, the agency that was implementing this included me in the design phase of this entire program, which was almost a 6-month stretch, where we started with a number of first internal consultations and then consultation workshops that happened in Samastipur, at first in Patna at the state level, then at the district level, and then at the block levels, even at the panchayat level. So we had school HMs, we had school teachers, we had parents, part of these consultative workshop to really understand what's the root cause of some of the problems that we are trying to address, and has managed to actually prevent dropouts in that particular district, and probably can become a model for several other districts as well.
No, that's fascinating. I think, this idea that the solution already exists within the community and the stakeholders know it, and the barrier is not an imagined solution, but the barriers that they are preventing them to get to that solution. Right. What was, just for my understanding, what was the big barrier here for dropouts? If you could just, on the pilot that you've spoken about.
Yeah.
Well, I would imagine there's household work to be done. There's distress at home, income distress, and need for labor. That's what I would imagine. But again, I'm not going to take a guess beyond that.
So exactly. Now, this is what, we also had started off with. But then we realized that, these challenges are there in almost every household. Right? You have something where you would want your maybe a 6th grader or a 5th grader to contribute to. But this goes back to a report that was published, I think, in 1999. It's called the Probe Report. which has a very telling, narrative. It says that children from lower income households are not attending schools, not because they have other things to do and so on and so forth, but because the parents somewhere know that the kind of quality that the school should provide to the children is not there. So it's these parents who are kind of giving up on the idea of education itself, right? And in some of our more backward districts, more backward parts of the country, we've seen this, right? So even in this one, it boiled down to the fact that the school, the primary school in the village, was not an attractive enough place for the children to go on a daily basis. So the program that we actually conceptualized after the entire stakeholder workshop, it was called Anand Shala. Where we said that instead of making these as just schools, let's do this Anand Shala program. And the entire program started with a lot of activities that children and teachers were supposed to do, which were outside the rigor of, whatever the curriculum demands, etc. We just looked at the relationship as it then existed between the HMs in these schools and the teachers, and the teachers and the parents, and the teachers and the children, right? And we just tried to loosen that up for the children to start getting more attracted about the idea of going to school, right? We also, the survey that we did, we also saw that dropouts do not happen overnight. It usually leads to something. And then something related to this is the importance in our work to look at data, which we so often overlook, because there are, these solutions. When you want to do a deeper dive, you would want to look at what is the information that exists, right? And information that exists will tell you that children who have not been attending school very regularly are more prone to dropping out, right? So the problem to solve is not a dropout problem, it's also an attendance problem. How do you fix that? Because we know that there are times when children may not come for school for fairly trivial reasons. Now, working with the parents to help them understand that, hey, missing school has a consequence, right? For even one day. Now, all of this went into the design of that program. That sort of answers your question.
It certainly does. Here is a classic assumption around the supply side of why dropouts happen, or that the reason for it is in the homes of the students. But here is a demand that had to be created for a place for them to arrive and enjoy themselves. So, that certainly is where the unlearning has to happen from a design perspective. Chetan, we've spoken about this journey where a social entrepreneur or civil society has to go through this deep learning process before they have enough credibility to begin working with government. At the same time, if you take this example further, if the school was not attractive enough, at the end of the day, members of civil society and foundations will have to give that input to the government, and government ownership has to come in place. And oftentimes, the reason I always talk about politics and political intent versus bureaucratic government ownership from the bureaucracy point of view is because things changed quickly. Bureaucrats sometimes leave, and they could leave in the middle of this program. So I want you to please tell us about cases where government ownership has worked. I'm assuming this is bureaucratic ownership as governments changed. And how has continuity been seen through with true ownership of government coming in perhaps a program like this that you're talking about?